All right, everybody, can you believe it? We are now at the beginning of Unit 2. Welcome to your second unit. So if you haven't yet, you want to start a new unit page in your notebook. On the right side, just put that Unit 2, flip the page, and then on your left side, today you're going to take notes on things that are not in the PowerPoint. So you have a copy of the PowerPoint, you have the text there. Anything that I say that's not in the text, um, you put that on the left side. People like that and want to do that some more. A good idea maybe to make a timeline because there's a lot of dates here as well. So this is an age of exploration and isolation. Notice that it began when the Renaissance was going on. So this is not completely separate from the Renaissance, but you see how this grew out of the Renaissance. A copy of this PowerPoint is in the barn, and if you look at it, there's some animations that you won't see in the video, like here, this little cartoon. So if you want to go see that on your own, feel free. Okay, so Europeans were seeking new trade routes. We learned in the prior unit how the Italian city-states were making a lot of money off of trade. Well, they wanted to find quicker and cheaper ways to make or to trade and to get those goods, especially things that there weren't much of in Europe, spices and luxury goods that they did not have there. Now, they could do this by competing with the Italian city-states, or they could do it by finding new trade routes altogether. And since technology was improving, maybe there was ways they could find trade routes by sea over oceans instead of just by land or instead of just in the Mediterranean. So the task was, how were you going to find these new trade routes? And even if you found them, how were you going to manage them? How were you going to be able to succeed and not, get attacked or not sink or anything like that? So various countries throughout Europe were now trying to find these now new trade routes, and that in itself became a competition. Just like how we discussed that Italian city-states were competing over art, now you had European countries and kingdoms competing over controlling the seas. Whoever could control the seas would control trade, and that means more money, and that means more power. Okay, so think of the Renaissance and the idea of reaching full potential, right? That ties in this here. What can humans do? Can we find new ways to get around the earth? Can we question things? Should we question, hey, is the earth really flat, right? So all these themes that we learned about continue to exist. And the church that played a big role in the Renaissance continues to play a big role in the age of exploration. Okay, so now that you got that background. Now, the Europeans already came in contact with the East. There were the Crusades earlier, so they knew these things existed. They brought them back to Europe before, and they wanted, more of that. So now there were not Crusades anymore, but now there was, all right, they had knowledge of it. How could we get that? Italy controlled this trade route with the East. How could they bypass Italy, right? That was the question. So if they couldn't compete with the Italians in the Mediterranean, maybe they could do it by using the Atlantic Ocean. So besides trade, there was some hostility between different parts of the world, and you do have the influence of trying to bring Christianity to other parts of the world. We're going to spend more time on that on a video, either the next one or the one after. All right, today we're going to focus primarily on the motivating factor of trade. Here's an example. Bartolomeu Dias was Portuguese, and he was the first European to set sail around Africa, and he did that in 1488. He lived from 1451 to 1500, and he was actually a royal knight in Portugal. When he rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the end of Africa, he actually called it the Cape of Storms, but King John II later renamed it. Now, how could explorers like him do this? Well, because of inventions and technology. One of them was the caravel. This was a new type of ship created by the Portuguese in the 1400s with lateen sails. It was lighter and allowed it to go faster. These triangular sails also were used by the Arabs and even by the earlier Greek and Romans, and they made a comeback, if you will, in the Mediterranean. These sails made it possible to actually sail into the wind. You also have other technologies like the astrolabe and the compass. There's an astrolabe for land, and there's a mariner's astrolabe. And that's used to locate the position of the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars to help navigation. And we all know that compass is for direction, and that was invented by the Chinese Han Dynasty in like 206 or so BC. Now, Portugal led the way in the age of exploration, and much of it can be contributed to Prince Henry, the navigator. He wasn't called Prince Henry, the navigator, at the time. German scholars later called him that. But he set up exploration schools, navigation schools, so that the Portuguese would be knowledgeable and be able to control this. He actually was influenced as a young man when Portugal was sacked often by Barbary pirates. And then he wanted to go to Africa, but he knew the ships were too heavy, so he tried to find new ways. So he was successful, and the Portuguese started to go around Africa in their caravels, and they had ports along the coast of Africa. Right? They were not into the interior of Africa yet, but just along the edge, where they started to do some trade. But their real goal wasn't just to trade with Africa. They wanted to get around Africa and eventually go to Asia. So Portuguese sailors did that. The first one to make it around there, to make it around Africa, was Diaz, but the first one to make it then to Asia was Vasco da Gama. And he did that. He was born in the 1460s and lived to 1524, and he was the first European to reach India by sea. And this now connects Europe with Asia, right? Now, besides Portugal, Spain was also making claims. There is a little animation here in the PowerPoint, if you want to see it. We all know about Christopher Columbus and how he tried to shorten the route to Asia by going west, but surprise, surprise, you had the Americas in the way that he did not know about. Now, he was trying to get to the Indies, which we'll see on a map later. But that is not India, okay, but a series of islands in the east. So now things become global. You have Europe connected to Asia. You have a whole new world, basically, in the Americas. And the Portuguese and the Spanish were both going to the Americas, and they both wanted to control it. Now, Pope Alexander was unhappy. These were like his two Catholic children. Spain and Portugal, even throughout the Reformation, remained two very Catholic countries. He did not want them fighting. So they signed and ratified this Treaty of Tordesillas in Spain in 1494. And it basically said everything to the east was Portugal's, and everything to the west was Spain's. And of course, they didn't know just how far west the Americas went at the time, so Spain got a good end of that deal. So now they started taking control of lands that were previously controlled by various Muslim empires, right? So you have India, ports of India from the Portuguese, the Strait of Malacca. This is a huge one. To this day, the Strait of Malacca is the most important shipping lane in like the world. To this day, 1/4 of all oil that's shipped goes through the Strait of Malacca. And this strait is really important because it connects the Indian and the Pacific Ocean, if you see there in the right corner. And it's the shortest sea route between India and China, right? So another reason why it's so crucial. So this was controlled by first the Arabs, then the Portuguese, and later, as we'll see, the Dutch and the British. Now, the Portuguese were bringing back goods at cheaper prices at the Italians. So now the Portuguese were becoming like the world's global player, the world's dominator. And other countries are like, well, now we want to get on this besides just Spain. So by the 1600s, the Dutch and the English get involved. And when you see the Netherlands, that's the Dutch, okay? And part of them was controlled by Spain, but now they were able to declare independence because now they were making money and becoming more powerful as well. So the Dutch now had trading outposts, like on the island of Java in Indonesia. And then the Dutch got control of the Strait of Malacca by the Portuguese. And now the Dutch also now controlled the Cape of Good Hope on the southern tip of Africa, which is why you have a lot of Dutch speakers or Afrikaners who settled in what is now South Africa. We'll learn more about that when we do the Age of Imperialism. So there's the Cape of Good Hope. That's the southern tip of Africa, right? Amsterdam there now became the leading commercial center. If you wanted to be alive at that time, that's where you wanted to live. It was the highest standard of living. Now you also have the British and the French getting involved. Hey, we don't want just the Portuguese and the Dutch making money. We want to get into it. So in 1664, the French East India Company is created. They had limited contact with Southeast Asia and inward. That's why later when we do imperialism, why I say Vietnam and Cambodia were French colonies. We'll learn about that later. If you have any questions, write it down on the bottom so we can go over it when I check this. And here's a good start to Unit 2. We'll see you next class. The password, if you didn't see, was hot sauce.